Thank you for joining PwC's Aerospace and Defense Virtual Roundtable on the topic of artificial intelligence. We look forward to hearing from our panelists today and all of you to encourage your participation. You're currently automatically muted, but if you'd like to join in the discussion, please use the reaction icons in the lower part of your screen, type your comments in our chat, come off mute. And now I'll welcome our host, Joe Sherman, PwC's Aerospace and Defense AI leader.
Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate that. And hello, welcome everybody to our first AI and A&D Roundtable session. The format for this session is meant to be relaxed, conversational, collaborative, and it's just for us to discuss what's happening in AI in our industry and to really further build our community for future sessions and activities. This is a no vendor, no analyst, no suits and ties event. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time today to discuss AI and A&D, which was basically a stellar year for government and aerospace and defense this year. As we know, advancements in existing AI services across machine learning, automation, computer vision, and others enabled greater productivity gains, as well as Gen AI taking most of the spotlight with new capabilities pouring into the sector. Mid-year last year, we saw Microsoft enter the market with Azure OpenAI for Azure Government, which allowed organizations to build their first ever chatbots, leveraging OpenAI's backend ChatGPT models. And then soon after that, you had Google and Amazon come to market with products like Bedrock and others. It was a highly competitive year for models, even with OpenAI releasing ChatGPT 3.5, 3.5 Turbo, 4.0, and then obviously 0.1 for reasoning. And then just most recently, today even, OpenAI announced ChatGPT Gov, which is going to provide a different version of ChatGPT Enterprise for government clients facing regulatory compliance issues as well. And as we've seen in the news just recently, the announcement of Stargate with a $500 million investment directly into that organization, and the additional $1.5 billion pouring in for AI infrastructure to support that development. And then obviously some news recently around DeepSeek in terms of their new R1 model and what that means for the market as well. So we're going to be talking about all these things as part of our session, and we may pivot depending how the audience responds to a few poll questions. Without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. And again, thank you for your time. We've got Todd Cackley, who is the CIO of Textron Systems. We have Joe Kopaz, who's the Vice President of Aerospace for AI Services. Andrew Coleman, who is the President of GE Aerospace Software. And Dina Deshmuth, who is with us from GE Aerospace Corporate. Folks, thank you again for joining today. And I guess what we'll do is we'll start with the first topic, AI successes and challenges. So I know that we've all been challenged in this sector, specifically around what's been available in AI for our use in A&D. Those of us on government cloud services have been very limited in what is possible. So you saw a lot of engineers building localized models within their container-based services, because these services that are available out in the commercial market, such as ChatGPT Enterprise and others, were not available or were not compliant, in this government cloud environment. And so as the year continued forward, there were new services from vendors like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, obviously OpenAI directly as of today, with these services that offer the capabilities for Gen AI to enable services around chatbots and other custom GPT services. But let's not forget, some of the advancements in computer vision or autonomous capabilities for drones, rocket development and design, aircraft design, increases of productivity across the supply chain. These are just some of many challenges that the sector has definitely faced. So I'll turn it over to Todd first. Todd, from your perspective, what are your greatest challenges and maybe greatest successes for the biggest year in AI?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just one quick clarification. So CIO of Textron Systems is a defense division of our business, which I was the former CIO of. So just a little bit of clarification for those that don't know Textron. We're a multi-conglomerate, primarily aerospace and defense company, but also have some industrial manufacturing as well. So that in itself created some initial challenge for us, because we're both a commercial business and a defense business. So we sit on two different Microsoft tenants, both the commercial Microsoft O365 and Microsoft Stack, and in the GovCloud community in the defense sector as well. So as we started looking at generative AI, basically started with my move to this role in summer of 2023, with basically an ask from our CEO, with all the hype and everything that was happening in the news and the media, and questions from the board of directors and investors and everyone. The simple ask of me was, what should we be doing about generative AI? So we took an internal look at that and decided to focus on an initial use case in our aerospace business, in our commercial aviation business, to really address a gap or a need that we thought could be a valued use case. And if the value actually was demonstrated through that use case, we would be able to continue on the journey and look at opportunities to continue to replicate the capabilities and drive more value through the organization. So it was a very fail fast an approach, without kind of jumping in all in and making a big bet on large investments, commitments to the PTUs or commitments to compute or whatever we needed to look at the time. It was really more, let's start off as a pay-as-you-go. Let's look at the opportunity through a real business problem. That business problem was in our aircraft services business on the commercial side, where we have A&P mechanics that are servicing our aircraft. There's a high amount of data that's required to be accessed when our customers bring their aircraft in for service. Sometimes A&P mechanic may see an aircraft pull in that they've never serviced before. We service every make and model of every aircraft, Cessna, Beechcraft, Hawker, that we've made over several decades. So it can present a challenge in terms of different variants of aircraft configuration, different service histories, different aircraft bulletins, just a massive amount of data. And not only from the, how do I service the aircraft, but what are some of the diagnostics telling me, and how should I troubleshoot the aircraft? So our hypothesis was, can A&P mechanics service our aircraft faster with generative AI than without? Can they find information, time to insight, faster with generative AI than without? So we put a proof of concept together with our partner Microsoft, using the Microsoft Azure AI stack, and built a custom co-pilot around that particular problem, and spent a lot of time initially in the period of a 4-week proof of concept. Spent a little bit of time kind of debating the data, and then realizing we really needed to move past formats and structures, and really focus on the quality of our prompting, the quality of how we interact with the model, with our data. And in no time, we were able to demonstrate value, and we took that back to our business leaders and ultimately our CEO, who's also a customer of our service center as a private pilot himself that flies his own personal aircraft. Both our CEO and CFO are customers of our service center and fly our aircraft in their private time. They were able to quickly attach to that value and see the benefit. So we essentially scaled that solution, put every make, model aircraft, and continue to build out that data model. But basically rolled that out globally before the end of 2023, globally to 1,500 A&P mechanics across all of our service centers globally. And we felt that it was a good launch case, but also pretty early adopter from an aerospace industries association, jumping into this space and using it in a productive manner, and having that impact on our service center. The other problem that I think it solved was, and the challenge that we had was, there's a high turnover with retirements and senior mechanics leaving the field, and having to have that tribal knowledge leave an organization. How do you continue to capture that and be able to close the gap between somebody who's more junior in the mechanic space, and have that access to the insight and the information, and to be able to accelerate their learning curves? So we found that it was an additional benefit there as well, helping us drive the insight and to build the capabilities and take less time the senior on-the-job training as needed. And we've since expanded that, but I think the challenge, you mentioned challenges, one of the initial challenges as we saw the value there very quickly, the challenge was at the time that there wasn't an equivalent offering of capabilities on the defense side. And so we certainly faced a lot of challenge as an organization as we had to make some decisions. I had to make decisions as an IT leader on how do I prevent this sprawl of everyone going off and trying to just use publicly accessible. How do we make that safe and secure so we don't have issues of concerns of intellectual property loss or patent infringement coming back into our organization? So we had to make some decisions on hardening our environment, from a network and preventing our users from using non-sanctioned third-party LLMs or third-party tools, and kind of wait for the timely deployment of the secured and approved solutions. So we were able to quickly move with things like Copilot browser, Edge browser, and so forth for our commercial businesses, and then had to wait, to your point, Joe, with the GovCloud readiness. We were one of the first launch early adopters, early entries into the GovCloud community, and built our own basic chat GPT like browser for our defense businesses. And that's certainly enabled us to move with some custom use cases there as well. And we're seeing things progress pretty fast in this space on the defense side. There's always been this concern with the latency between commercial and gov, and the time it takes to get parity between the feature set. But this is a space that we're seeing actually a lot more happen faster. And I think in this space, there's some decisions by Microsoft, at least, to design with parity in mind up front, and have to navigate the FedRAMP hoops and so forth. But I think I'll pause there and let somebody else
that was great.
move on.
Yeah, that was great. Todd, you have a unique position where you had to balance GovCloud and commercial cloud capabilities for the entirety of the organization. And so I had a question for you, because I remember you guys being very early on, ahead of all of the toolkits for a UI, for a chat bot, and then of course, way ahead of OpenAI, like a chat GPT front end that would solve a lot of problems off the bat. What made you guys act now in terms of moving forward versus kind of waiting it out a little bit? Was it more of we've really got to get this tech in here to help solve these specific issues? Those use cases were really driving that, or what was the main driving force?
Well, to be transparent, I think I had a sense of urgency stepping into this role, and like I said, on the second day on the job, the CEO asking me in front of his entire executive staff, what should we be doing? And I saw that as a window of opportunity. If I don't address this question now, if I say, well, maybe we should sit back and just kind of take a look at it, maybe I wouldn't get the window of opportunity again. And I saw the momentum in that discussion with some very curious leaders that thought there was something there. We're not AI is something that's been in our portfolio for years. We've been autonomous, working in autonomy, working in deep learning and imagery insight analysis through AI solutions. So it's something in machine learning is a big part of our some of our capabilities. So the generative AI piece, while new, it certainly presented a lot of curiosity on how we could bring value. And it's interesting because it still continues to be, while we're progressing, and every piece of our business, every division has a somewhat of a foothold in a custom solution or one of the off-the-shelf solutions, and it continues to be a space where we feel that we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Todd. I'll have some more questions about this later. Joe, you guys were early adopters as well. I mean, again, no toolkits, you guys wanted to come out of the gate with a solution for the enterprise. Why don't you talk a little bit about, what you guys are doing? If you don't mind just reintroducing yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Joe Kopaz. I'm the Vice President of Software and Artificial Intelligence at Aerospace. So that means I get to own the software and autonomy on Dream Chaser, which is our autonomous spacecraft that goes up and navigates autonomously to the International Space Station and docks autonomously, and then will come back down and land. We also have a bunch of programs in defense, and then the piece of my job that I absolutely love is AI. That's my background. The question, I think, was, some of our challenges and some of our early successes here. I had a VP previously. He used to ask me whenever I would come in for our program reviews, like, what keeps me up at night? And so I always like to go back to that question of what are the things that I'm thinking about at night when I, start to cool down for the day. And I think about three major concerns in AI. The first is security, the second's complacency, and then the third one's cost, or really return on investment. From a security standpoint, I think Todd really nailed it. When I came in, we wanted to deploy AI immediately. We knew that people were using some of these tools externally. We didn't think that they were necessarily using our intellectual property, but were they sending themselves an email and asking it a question and providing a little bit of context about our business? Absolutely. And so we wanted to make sure that, we were enabling them to use some of those tools internally. I also worry about like the speed of development. From a security standpoint, it takes 6 to 12 months for us to actually get the latest foundational models up to GCC high. I'm hoping with the announcement of OpenAI Gov that we're able to kind of tighten that and perhaps get latest models a little bit more quickly. But I mean, we're using models that are 6 to 12 months old on most of our applications. From a complacency side, I think about large language models and generative AIs kind of like interns. They are incredibly fast. They can produce a large amount of content very quickly, but they don't know what they don't know. And you've always got to check your intern's work. And I worry about people getting complacent and not reviewing the output. I remember last year I was using our large language model, which we call InfoHub, to generate performance evals. And in performance evals, it's incredible. I have all of these comments from their peers. I have all of these comments from themselves. And it allows me to spend all of my time developing content on what did they do well and where do I want them to focus next year. Well, I have this prompt and I put in the information and I tell it to focus on my bullets first and then their peers and then their own. And I was scanning through and reading what it had generated at the end of the day. And at the very end, it said, because of all of their accomplishments this year, this employee deserves the highest rating, which for our company is a 3.3. And while they did a phenomenal job this year, they didn't actually deserve a 3.3. And as I went back and looked at the information that I put in there, they had said in their performance eval that, yeah, they had done a phenomenal job. And because of that, they earned a 3.3. And so I worry about complacency like that, where we get so comfortable with the tools that we just kind of lose the beat and we're not paying as close of attention as we need to. And then the third concern really is around cost and value. There's a ton of snake oil out there right now, and it is really hard to sort the wheat from the chaff, if I'm using that one correctly. But it's tough, right? I remember talking with a CIO of a local company here in Denver. We were chatting over coffee and he asked me, he's like, hey, how much is AI costing you? And I was looking at our token usage just earlier that day, and it's super, super small. I mean, we're talking, a handful of thousands of dollars a month. And he had blown through over $500,000 in the first month that he had launched his tool. It was way more than they had anticipated. A lot of it was due to retrieval augmented generation, which I'll probably talk about a little bit later. But they had gone through a ton of tokens in month one, and then in month two, their usage completely died off. And so they weren't really getting the value out of the tool. And so we do a lot with how we roll out our tools, going slow with MVPs and, getting a group of passionate people together and getting them to hammer away at it to see, what holes did we miss and what do we need to fix before it goes live for the rest of the company. On the positive side, on the successes in AI, I think this is where I'll spend a majority of my time in the rest of our discussion, but I'll just highlight a couple of key ones here. The outpouring of support for AI has just been incredible. At Aerospace, I think everyone has more work than they can get done in a day, and they were all wanting support from AI and from autonomous tools in general. One of our biggest successes up front was a framework of how we develop AI and how we go about deploying it. I mentioned, starting out with an MVP. When we developed our chatbot, we launched it in 4 weeks, if I remember correctly. It was terrible. It had a great foundational model on the back end, but when you looked at the interface, it was basically a command line. It didn't have any of the nice bells and whistles. It didn't have any chat history or any context given to it initially. It was literally just a text box for you. And really quickly, we started launching that to people, and we got it out to 200, 300 users immediately to start getting feedback on that, and then started building in things like chat history or retrieval augmented generation on corporate compliance files, or using it for like a personal database, stuff like that. And it was just a massive success. We just have continued to iterate on that tool, bringing in new foundational models when it made sense, bringing in new backend capabilities or front-end experiences for the user. And everyone's just been super, super supportive. Todd actually mentioned something I thought was really interesting that we had experienced with this tool as well, and that was, attrition. So attrition in the aerospace industry is actually decently low. It's somewhere like between 7 and 12%. But when you lose those people, they're never your low performers. They're always people who have been with you for a while. They have a ton of knowledge with them. We've started taking a lot of those files, that content that they've generated from throughout their career, and we'll now do retrieval augmented generation on the back end. And so while it's not a one-for-one replacement when we lose somebody, it definitely is a massive help. I don't feel like I lose some of those people anymore. I'm still able to take some of their knowledge and some of their intelligence and retain it and be able to pull out that information more quickly. I think I'll stop there for now, because I think in the other questions, we'll talk a lot more about some of what we've done with paired programmers or inbox intel, which we just launched about 3 months ago. So I'll stop there for now.
No, that's great, Joe. Thank you very much. And I know when we get into the strategic applications that leverage AI services, those are some great ones to talk about. Knowledge retention is a huge one, right? So even before the wave of Gen AI came out, some folks that I've been working with previously, we provided a solution for Virgin Galactic. They had a situation where they had 3 to 6 months of aircraft and spacecraft on ground. And one of the problems that we ran into trying to solve for that use case, through a whole process of automating flight analytics and computational fluid dynamics data, loads data, you name it, was witnessing the stark age gap between the folks that have been there for 20, 30 years that are from all of the major A&D providers, and then the new kids, that came straight out of college that are whiz kids. And there's a big knowledge gap between those two. A lot of the code was written in MATLAB, and these guys wanted to power through with Python. So how do you bridge that gap? So you really touched on a very important topic there. And I think one of the biggest successes that we've seen this year is the uptick in knowledge and acquisition of knowledge, and just being right there available to you. I mean, I'm going to be honest, even in this meeting, I've got ChatGPT up on the right-hand side to ask them some better questions and listen to the topics that we're talking about. So it's that, two-way conversation and relationship. We've kind of gone past I'm dating AI to we're in a relationship now, and it's got to get better, right? We've had some rocky starts, but this is where we're at today. So thanks. I want to pivot over to Andrew and Dinah. So, the reason I really selected you guys is you also come from a unique position where Dinah is in GE Aerospace corporate and has been tasked, by your CIO to come in and really deploy a lot of services for your enterprise. And that's not a specific vendor in mind. You guys were a cross vendor, had a cross vendor approach. And, Andrew, you run the entire division of GE Aerospace software, and you guys have latest, kind of cutting edge flight analytics software that your clients, subscribe to. and are trying to get as much data from that corpus of information that you offer up in a modern way, and are challenged with, how do you add, unique features to that platform or portfolio of software to your clients so that they feel like they're getting, value add and there's a continuity and innovation there. So I'd love to hear from both of you guys with respect to your unique positions and your greatest challenges and successes in leveraging artificial intelligence within your organization. So in terms of the Hollywood Square, who goes next perspective, I'll pass it over to Andrew. Andrew, you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Joe. And I appreciate the opportunity. I've already taken a page of notes from my peers here on this call. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun throughout the time, but I'm gonna throw out two H's that really hit me hard as this technology kind of just confronted us all in a way that probably technology hasn't confronted us before in our careers. And there's been some pretty massive technologies that have come out in our lifetime. The first H is the hype H. Second H is the habit H. On the hype side, a little bit about our business, to your point, we're looked upon by GE Aerospace to serve our external customers. So airlines, lessors, MROs, how do we help them take advantage of the data we tend to know really, really well, not just to keep our engines on wing, but help them fly safer, more sustainably, help make sure records are readily available to make sure aircraft is airworthy, but also just understanding the value of an aircraft at any point in time. So with that, we've been really, really fortunate to build a library of about 55,000 years of full flight data. As you can imagine, in this world we're in, AI would thrive with data of that richness. And so in the hype, really had to be really wise about what we were doing with this data that we were trusted with by our customers. This isn't something we just started throwing experiments against left, right, up and down. But at the same point, because the data is so rich, so clean, so good, we knew we were tapping into a lot of gold. Every 6 months as a team, we block a week for an innovation week. This started in engineering and now it's made its way to all functions. So our sales team participates, our marketing team, our product management team, our engineers. Early on, and I'll drop in the chat here, saw maybe some bad uses of AI. I was made to look like a Jedi for May the 4th, which is a little bit scary. I could probably show you guys that picture, but also started to see some really promising uses of AI. This will sound a little bit boring, but using our user guides, something that nobody ever wanted to be tasked to write, to feed the technology we're using to frankly automate a lot of our training and automate a lot of our support through the user guide. Again, something very, very old school, but now with this new technology, we can extract a whole lot of value. Let me jump really quick and then I'll hand it to Denna. The habit side, because our workforce is fairly diverse in a lot of ways, where they live, but also the age demographic, there's a group of our engineers that honestly just didn't want to be told a new way to do things. And yet to bury our head in the sand and keep writing code the way we've written code the last 20 or 25 years will frankly make us uncompetitive. And so very early on, we leaned on, in our case, Microsoft and their GitHub technology to start automating a lot of our code generation. Saw some people say, oh my gosh, I'm addicted. And some people say, this is something I don't know that I want to do. But through a little bit of peer pressure and frankly, not overhyping it, but seeing results, we started to form some pretty good habits. The downside, had we not started to form these habits, our competition is forming these habits and they're going to be putting code out on a much more rapid fashion than we'd seen before. Our business model is just like Netflix, in that if our customers don't like what we're producing, it's very easy to cancel us and subscribe to another service. Very different than traditionally. You think of GE, we're selling an engine that goes on wing for 20 or 30 years and has a long tail. That's just not our business model in our software business. So that was a habit we had to form. It's not something we're perfect at, but I've been really proud in the last 12 to 18 months to see the amount of adoption we are getting using that tool as an example. Den, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Joe, thanks for having us in this conversation. Hello, everyone. My name is Dinakar Deshmukh. I lead our data sciences and AI function within GE Aerospace. I think, Joe, to your point with respect to some of the challenges and some of the successes which we have seen across GE Aerospace, I think majority of the themes were already covered by other panel members, but I will double click on a couple of them to give more clarity. From a background point of view, as you can imagine, AI is not new to GE Aerospace. We have been using AI for a little more than a decade. We call machine learning, conventional natural language processing, deep learning, computer vision, time series, you name it. We have been actually applying that for quite some time. Now, what changed in the last 18 months, as everybody was articulating, is the technology advancements which happened in the generative AI side of it really provided another great opportunity to step change the way how we are thinking about AI. From a challenges point of view, it actually poses as an opportunity at the same time challenge. What do I mean by that? There was a lot of excitement, positive entropy, and to some extent hype around the generative AI. So the challenge which we were actually trying to grapple is like everybody wanted to sprinkle this dust of AI on every problem what they think could be on the table. As we all of us know that like AI cannot solve all your problems. It is actually good for certain type of problems. One of the initial challenge which we encountered is how do we make sure that the excitement gets somewhat tied to a business outcome. I think that's the key aspect of it, because without tying an initiative to business outcome, it's a good science experiment. What do we do with that? Now, the second challenge which we have seen is, especially as the technology was evolving so fast, we all are engineers. So we have this tendency to go jump into the problem and fix the problem by ourselves. Especially in a space like this, we have to take a cautious approach. You may not want to solve or over-index or over-solution that by yourself. You have to see what the ecosystem is doing, what the hyperscalers are doing. You don't want to solve for yourself because that will become commodity in week or month. So how do we really balance that? What do I solve inside GE Aerospace? Where do I rely on hyperscalers to provide that facility is a constant challenge. I don't think we solved it, but that's something which we have to keep a constant eye on. The third challenge, which actually Andrews alluded to, is the developments in AI. If you really want to unleash the outcomes, it is just not only technology advancements, it's cultural. It's a combination of both technology and culture. What do I mean by that? How do we really make sure that our workforce is comfortable, absolutely comfortable, to make sure that like we use some of these technologies in day-to-day activities? I'll give you one example for that. I think other panelists were alluding towards that. When the chat GPT became public, everybody, even with GE Aerospace, is not immune to that. Everybody started using the system from GE, and we had guidelines. But at the same time, we saw the number of users using that was actually constantly growing. So there was a little bit of a concern, like, are we at a risk of like leaking some of our sensitive / IP as a part of that? We had a clear guidelines, but we don't know what we don't know. So what we decided to do is decide to launch what we call it as a AI wingmate. This is a equivalent of ChatGPT, but inside firewalls of GE Aerospace, and sits in the GE Aerospace ecosystem, where our employees could be absolutely comfortable to use it the way how they want to use to get the productivity out of it. And that's actually played a significant role, in my opinion, a culture shift for the broader organization. It is available to all 60,000 plus employees of GE Aerospace. And since we launched it, there are more than close to 2 million transactions on that system. It's massive. To be very transparent, Joe, when we launched it, even we did not think it will become such a huge hit with the employee base.
I remember, Dana. And can you repeat that again? The number of users you've deployed to so far?
It's available for 50,000 plus employees of GE Aerospace.
50,000 people. Yeah. So you got some experience there. No pressure.
It was actually, I think it was Joe who was earlier talking about it. We took the same approach. We released it to say first initially 200, released it to 2,000, then released it to 60,000. But all happened in 6 weeks. So our time was like shrunk significantly. But from a culture point of view, I think we moved the needle towards like employees are getting comfortable to use these systems in a very, what do you call, safe and playing environment. So that's our biggest success. And I will allude to some of these success stories in our upcoming conversation, Joe. But one of the another big success which we have seen is how do we everybody knew that like the unstructured content has the tons of insights, information. Especially what generative AI was able to do in the last 12 to 18 months is unlock the potential especially when it came to unstructured content. So I think GE Aerospace experience is absolutely similar to the observations which other panelists have on that. With that, back to you, Joe.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm writing some stuff down, and we can flip this around however we see fit, because we have that opportunity. It's a little unscripted here. We have some topics that are already queued up, but you touched on a few. Actually, everybody touched on culture. If you think about from an engineering culture, I want to take it to that type of conversation. Software engineers early on were excited and kind of hesitant to use this technology to really set up that paired programming type experience. I think that's evolved since now. I would say that some of us older guys like myself, when I'm opening up VS Code and I've got GitHub Copilot running, and it was kind of weird. There wasn't a great kind of flow in the very early stages. I know that one of my colleagues, Jake Wilson, he leads our global generative AI factory. And we've got thousands of engineers across the United States and internationally as well. And they were adopting these tools. And one of my other colleagues, Kevin Smith, has been leading a practice on developing code intelligence, one of the accelerators that we have that does document automation, code documentation, code generation, translation, all that good stuff. And we're starting to finally see, I think, the full integration. I wouldn't say it's perfectly seamless yet, but it's changed the culture from an software engineering, diehard, dev type mindset to accept, these tools and really integrate them into their workflow. I would say, on the topic of challenges with that and respect to culture, some of my clients cannot use commercial cloud. And so they're watching their colleagues over here with GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT Enterprise, and they're translating and transferring and converting and doing all this really cool stuff over here. And you're like, I can't do anything, right? This sucks. So a lot of them are kind of taking the same approach you all took when ChatGPT Enterprise wasn't available and built your own chatbots, right? And that was I got to act now, get it out the door. It was successful. I would think that, we wait a little or, act now on the software engineering side of Gen AI integration as well. And I'm glad that ChatGPT Gov, not that they're the only vendor out there, but the fact that they are offering these capabilities in GovCloud now is phenomenal, because I have some clients that were about to embark on building those GitHub Copilot features into a government cloud environment or into a container-based environment. And I don't think that was going to be a great experience, all up, for them over time. But, everyone's still kind of playing the waters right now. But it all goes back to culture. How do we integrate these tools seamlessly? How do we make sure that they actually sit side by side with our engineers and our prompters and our general, user base to really increase productivity? So we actually went into 32 minutes over that topic, or 2 minutes over the topic. Almost nailed the 30 minutes there. That was great dialogue. And I think that takes us into our next topic as well. And I think we've got a poll question here, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to hear from the audience. What has been your greatest challenge in AI this year? So topping us out is finding real measurable value. I think that leads us really into our next topic around strategic AI apps. This is good data, guys. Cool. So why don't we kick it back over to Todd and talk, Todd, I think you mentioned a few of those use cases and some of the strategic apps that you guys had already developed. Maybe if you don't want to repeat yourself, maybe kind of think about what's kind of ahead. Feel free to take it anywhere you want.
Yeah, so I think the last 12 to 18 months has really been focusing on getting our foundation established, building some internal capabilities around architecture, understanding how we navigate the commercial and gov spaces, and how do we continue to build a working group across our businesses that can leverage and replicate the capabilities and have a conversation across our business without solving the same problem 4 or 5 times, which is always a challenge when you're a multi-industry conglomerate with individual priorities across different businesses and sectors of business where they want to all accomplish, for the good of the company, accomplish innovation and technology improvements, but not necessarily leveraging from the best practices across the enterprise. So that's been the focus as we look ahead for the next year or so, going back to your question of value, or your point of value, the team really needs to start focusing on understanding, now that we have our foundation established and we understand the multi-layer strategy, which includes, if we're sticking with the technology stack through the Azure AI portfolio, which includes the stuff that comes with the Edge browser capability, all the way down to building our own custom solutions, and anywhere in between with the custom with the Copilot out of the box, off the shelf stuff, and figuring out how the low code development fits in there. But as we look to continue to go beyond just penetrating the immediate opportunities for value, we need to start building out a better definition of how do we measure and capture value. And it's going to be more than just the hours of efficiency. That's going to be the elusive one, I think, when you can feel that, I personally, and I think there was some examples of performance reviews or just using it for day-to-day efficiency around presentations or emails and so forth. Each of us consuming the technology in our own personal lives, we feel that you were more productive, but what does it do to the bottom line in terms of, in our case, delivering an aircraft out the door faster, delivering more aircraft, delivering more product to the customer, servicing the customer faster? It has to have something that has a tangible impact, whether it's customer sentiment, whether it's the quality of service to the product, and whether it's being able to engineer things faster. We're looking at that as we work in our automotive industry. What's the metric around quickly turning to new OEM vehicle models and being able to address the time to design for next generation fuel tanks and fuel systems for those OEMs, and being able to shorten that, and including the whole response to contracts and solicitations for opportunities, both on the government side and in the commercial side, as we look at what it takes to compete with a very growing industrial base in the defense sector, being able to be responsive to RFPs, being able to use our asset libraries and our knowledge warehouses internally to be able to turn white papers faster, to be able to get points of view out in terms of responding to RFPs and contracts, and internally also to be able to respond to our contracts that we're signing up for too, on our end with our supply chain. So lots of opportunity, but I think the bigger focus, there's I would break it down into two critical areas. One, continue to maximize where I think we haven't, to my earlier point, we haven't scratched the surface yet. We've invested in the capability. We haven't overinvested, but we need to still drive the consumption of the tools to be able to at least keep up with our investment level, and at the same time be able to yield the return on that investment and be able to measure that. And that's going to be the elusive piece. And I've got the team thinking about that and how we capture those different KPIs and metrics to be able to show that this is continuing to add value.
That's great, Todd. And just as a reference, PwC released its global CEO survey, and there was a lot of data that came back on generative AI in terms of profitability, increased productivity, revenue, and growth, overall, and some expectations. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat window for anyone that wants to review that. But specifically to this team, Joe, you had some pretty interesting numbers there with respect to like the strategy and the return on investment for pair programming. You want to talk a little bit about that in terms of your strategic applications?
Yeah, I figured you might bring up the numbers there. So when we rolled out our roadmap for AI, I was originally thinking about 3 pillars. We've evolved from this now, but I think it still sets really good context. The three pillars that I was thinking about in AI were commercial tools. So these are foundational models where it doesn't make sense for me to go spend $300 million to go build my own foundational model when I can just buy one off the shelf from Microsoft or OpenAI or, pick one. The second one was custom tools. So these are applications where it's like, okay, it makes sense for us to build this tool ourselves. Maybe it needs just some fine tuning and, we're using like some base model somewhere, like vision systems, they're pre-programmed, and then we can go off and add our own imagery and say, okay, now this is the type of imagery I want you to focus on. And then the third one was mission-specific solutions. So to talk a little bit about our commercial tools and what we deployed early on, the paired programmer was one of the first things that we deployed. The numbers that Joe's specifically interested in here, we saw an increase of 55% in software velocity. Basically, for every 2 programmers, we were getting a third programmer for free. We had rolled this out in a trial phase, and right when I came in, we made a whole bunch of changes. And so I remember looking at the data for velocity, and I was like, there's no way. Like if we calculate that out, it was $1,000 a day per developer that we were saving. We had rolled it out to 150 people, so we were literally saving $150,000 a day, and it was costing us on the order of, I don't know, $600 or something like that for the month. So I mean, we're talking, $10 per day or something like that, $20 per day total. And I didn't believe the numbers. I was like, no, there's too many variables we've switched here. And so the easiest way to go test that is to go double the amount of people that are on the trial. So then we moved into 300 people on the trial, and no kidding, it doubled again. And we started saving $300,000 a day. It was just absolutely insane. And so we started really digging into how are people using this paired programmer? What are they doing with it that's making it so valuable? When we deployed it, I had the impression that it was going to be our lower level guys that got more value out of it. The people that are fresh out of school and they may not know the most optimal algorithm to do a sort or something like that, right? They're constantly going to Stack Exchange because they're like, okay, I know there's an algorithm for this, but I don't use this a lot, so what is the best one? And they did get a massive amount of use out of that. They would ask it right in their VS Code, their IDE there, hey, what sort algorithm should I use? But then not only would it tell them what sort algorithm to use, but it's also monitoring their code and saying, oh, I can tell you want to sort these variables. Here's the code for you. They got tremendous value out of that immediately. So we were developing code. It's autocomplete on steroids. We also started to use it to review code and explain code, especially for our junior developers in general. If somebody builds 4 lines of Python that, just changed the world. A friend of mine previously, I remember looking at some of his code and literally 3 lines. And I was like, I don't understand what you're doing here. Like I can see there's 3 different filters going on and you're pulling variables and you're nesting things inside. And nowadays I just highlight it and say, explain this to me. What is this insane piece of code doing? It's completely illegible, which is kind of like the code I write. But the younger developers, they got a ton of use out of it. But what really blew my mind is what our senior developers started to do. For them, the autocomplete is pretty valuable, but they're not really asking questions. They know what sorting algorithm they want to use. And so it's normally really quick. They start writing that sort algorithm, then it'll autocomplete it for them. But what blew my mind was when one of our guys took it from an architectural standpoint, he really took a step back and said, okay, what application do I want here? How am I going to architect this system? And he basically drew this giant network diagram that said, okay, these are all the functions I'm going to need at the end of the day. Here's kind of how they're going to feed into each other. We ingested that with one of our multimodal models and said, okay, here's a software architecture diagram. Go build this. And it did. We found we have to strike some things out. It gets a little bit lost, especially when the diagrams are super complex. But they were able to create just an insane amount of value instantly. It was stuff like PDR and CDR level design that we were now able to give it, and it could go off and code for us. I'm starting to see some applications in Scrum management. Matter of fact, it was PwC who first showed me some of the tools that they're developing there, and now they're becoming a little bit more mainstream, but tools that help you monitor your backlog, help you prioritize that backlog, tools that help you develop the user stories and say, okay, here's what we're going to focus on this sprint. Here's the entire code piece we're going to write. I think the next piece that we're missing right now is taking those user stories and then actually getting it to go develop code. If we can take that architectural diagram, build that into the Scrum and the different functions we have to go build, prioritize that backlog, and then break that backlog down into stories, I think the next step there is to take that into a coding model and say, okay, now go build out this code for me and write it in its entirety. And then we can talk a lot about like testing and stuff like that. I'm still a big fan of a lot of human testers in the loop at this point, because like I mentioned earlier, it's like an intern. It doesn't know what it doesn't know yet.
No, that's great feedback. That's something that we've really focused on this past year. I mentioned code intelligence as one of the accelerators, but the other one is a solution called SDLC Canvas, and that was our greatest problem. Like we're not getting great user requirements and transitioning a use case to a user story to actual executable tasks for developers to go after, and that's where there's a velocity breakdown and a gap between those two things. And I think there's a big opportunity there with respect to taking an idea and then executing the code in production and looking at the benchmark across that. So Joe, thank you for highlighting that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for sure. Let me move over to Andrew and Dina. With respect to how you guys are handling and I guess leveraging new and exciting products that you're releasing throughout the GE or corporate enterprise, and then how Andrew, you're taking new services to your clients. I'd love to get your perspective on some of the specific AI applications that are of excitement and of interest moving forward.
Excellent. I'd love to. I'll start, and then I'll toss it over to you again. I'll start by giving you a shout out, actually. The tool he mentioned, our AI Wingmate, that's been rolled out universally across our entire business. Our chairman's known, kind of like in the Amazon way, we're probably all very familiar with wanting a very standard memo on key decisions, on key transactions, acquisitions, this sort of thing. And what would have been a weekend or two of a lot of drafts and grabbing everybody for a meeting, potentially even hiring a McKinsey or a Bain or a strategy firm, has turned into a very automated, in some cases minutes, process to write a very thoughtful memo. And so I don't think that was his intended use case when we started, but wow, has it saved me a lot of time. And I've been just very, very impressed at how well these memos can be done by AI Wingmate. So it's been a good internal win. Externally, I'll point to something we saw over the summer that's made its way through the holiday season, and we think we'll even see even more in the coming summer. A busy travel time for people as they go on vacations. Airlines really live by those two seasons and need reliability to be as high as possible. Because we keep assets for a long time in our industry, a lot of the older aircraft just aren't censored in a way where they tell you a lot of what's going to happen. And when you look at a typical narrow body, the number one thing that'll cause an outage mechanically is brakes and tires. Unfortunately, the old 737s in particular don't have a lot of censoring around brakes and tires. And yet in our business, one of the gifts we've been given is we do house billions of maintenance logs and pilots logs, just saying what's going on. And so we started looking at words like stick, words like stuck, words like sticky, and starting to correlate that then to the traditional way, which is always cycle and season. This many cycles, we look at the tire, this many cycles, this kind of heat, we look at the brakes. And yet with weird weather patterns and that sort of thing, a lot of those models, frankly, weren't holding up. Runways were hotter than we were used to. Runways were colder than we were used to. Runways were more harsh than potentially we were used to. And so pulling all this together, we're able to actually, for several of our customers, we're able to show this post summer season, remove a lot of the need for that word cancel delay we hate seeing when we're at the airport due to brakes and tires. So that was an early use case that we were actually very, very excited to see play out with the 737 in particular.
Thanks, Andrew. Like maybe I'll touch upon Joe to your point a little bit more broadly, then come to a specific one. I think as Joe and Todd were articulating earlier, especially I want to draw upon like what Todd was mentioning earlier, especially the way how we are approaching outcomes from applying AI. It has two dimensions. One, with respect to improving our employee productivity, that's one dimension. The second dimension is when I apply AI on my business processes, the outcomes are differentiated. Can I improve my TAT time when I actually give back the engine back to my customers in a short time? Can I predict something on my engine failures faster than otherwise what could have? That's not productivity. That's a business process optimization. The value for that is like very, very significant. Now, one thing which we are actually doing in a very structured way within GE Aerospace is any AI initiative we are launching, we are trying to articulate the business outcome. Either it could be monetary or non-monetary, but we need to have a very clear definition of what is the success for that initiative and who is the business leader who is actually willing to say, yep, I'm the one who is actually going to get the benefit for this. Because that actually, again, goes back to my earlier conversation with respect to tying AI investments into business outcomes. So we have been doing that for a little more than now close to a year. So where there's a little bit of a more structured discipline centered around it. And again, coming back to very specific outcomes, especially with some of these developments which we are actually using, both conventional AI as well as some of the generative AI side of it, we are able to improve the way how we monitor our commercial engines. Almost like we increased our lead time by more than 60%. We increased our detection rate by more than 40%. These are big numbers. So I think some of these are actually in one place where we are operating, and some of the outcomes are very similar. And as it was with Joe, I can't tell that like our numbers are as great as you when it came to Copilot. Our journey is somewhat relatively new, so time will tell how our Copilot for software development will evolve. That is actually in the hands of more than 600 developers as we speak. So we are seeing initial results which look pretty good, but I think the mantra is sustain. Like how do we make sure that like we sustain, we learn and scale it? So that's the key from our story on that front. With that, Joe, back to you.
No, this is great. So, what we talked about in terms of measurement, I think we can all agree that this is the year for gathering metrics, right? So there's been a lot of investment. There's been a lot of pilots and POCs and demos. There's been some strategic applications that you guys mentioned that actually provided return on investment and strategic value. But I think when we think in terms of our CEOs and the output of the companies that we work for, while we see the benefit in developer productivity or engineering productivity and increased velocity and those types of things, what are we doing to the bottom line of the organization, right? So I mentioned a case study before where we were brought in to fix some specific scenarios around data movement and data analysis, and we used traditional AI, not generative AI, to solve those. And while we saw tremendous benefits in being able to streamline analytics and do some pretty impossible things, leveraging machine learning that had not been done before in flight analytics, the bottom line that we actually resulted in a specific outcome for was reduced aircraft on ground. And so for that specific client, it was I'm saving $1 million per month by getting my birds in the air, right? And getting customers that are paying to board on the aircraft. And so those are the types of things I think we're going to see more of this year. Of course, in parallel, I think the innovation and improvement on models is just going to be compounded. We saw model improvement. If you think about like GPT 4.0 to 0.1, that wasn't a significant amount of time to get to 0.1. Those model releases, I think, are going to move from every 6 months to every year to monthly, and if not faster. You're starting to see open source models that are coming more available, and that's just going to spark more innovation, more capability, better competitiveness, and then price drops on some of this technology also. So again, metrics being the I think that the biggest focus for 2025, in my personal opinion, and I can't wait to get more data. So let's turn it back to the audience here and release a poll and specifically ask, what do we see the value, or what do you see that the value that AI brings to the aerospace and defense sector? So just take a few seconds and fill that out. Pretty clear. Productivity. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to jump to another topic that could be touchy, for some. I would say that this year, started off with an executive order that the new administration placed to reduce regulations on AI, really to promote innovation and well, as he calls it, dominance for America with respect to AI. I'm hoping to see, some change there with regulatory compliance and some of the very granular compliance and regulation that we're having to deal with, specifically for generative AI, but AI in general across government cloud. As we know, there's export control, there's ITAR issues, there's U.S. persons only working on specific programs and projects that have continued to limit us in our ability. If you think of just U.S. persons only working in ITAR environments with AI and CUI data as an example, right? That's a very small niche compared to the overall market. I'm hoping that there may be some changes there. Obviously, you can't change too much because we got to protect our assets. But I'm going to turn this over to the team here because it's a very important topic that I think we'll see some dramatic change this year. Todd, you operate in both commercial cloud and government cloud. Shifting gears into government cloud, what are your thoughts and what's your feedback with respect to regulatory compliance and the challenges you guys are facing, or benefits that you're seeing from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, I think I touched on this a little earlier. The parity between commercial and gov has always been a challenge, but we're seeing that parity gap narrow, and the latency between having something available in a commercial solution to having that similar capability enabled in the gov cloud is at least we're seeing a better line of sight to commitments to a roadmap versus sort of an open-ended discussion and industry leaning in and pushing these big technology companies to get more transparency on the roadmap. So that's helpful. I think the challenge, at least from my perspective, and others may share this as well, the challenge that I see as a technology leader is while there's still barriers to entry for just beyond the hyperscalers and those that have the access and the money to be able to invest and build the LLMs and to have the infrastructure and support that, there's still a lot of disruption in the space, and you mentioned, and we kind of talked about this a little bit with the fact that we had to start off by building some of our own front ends, building some of our own capability, and just taking that risk because it didn't exist. And in fact, an interesting evolution, even over the last 12 to 18 months since we started this journey, the things that we did to build our very first Gen AI custom copilot, there are a lot of things that are now automated that would have done that for us. And so we're continuing to see that that accelerated pace of change in how this technology is presented to us as technology leaders and companies to consume. I think that creates a unique challenge because of the pace of change happening so quickly. It could either drive, particularly for an organization like ourselves, a very fractured strategy where you get one part of the business that says, I actually have a very unique need in, let's take GovCloud for example. I have a very unique need in the GovCloud, and OpenAI now has a solution for that that I can get faster. And so then you start to make decisions whether or not you stick with a strategy or you have it's similar to cloud strategies. Are you a single cloud strategy or a multi-cloud strategy? And I think maybe looking at it from an AI perspective may be the same way. Are you a single AI provider or multi-AI provider. And as it gets further down from the hyperscalers and you get into the application OEMs and so forth that are using these back-end models as part of their underlying architectures, when do you make the decision that I want to use an application native AI versus keep with my strategy around my stack? So I think that continues to be the challenge. And the regulation, I don't know. It's interesting, and we're going to see a lot of turmoil around the regulation, but I don't think it's necessarily a near-term impediment right now. We can go on a whole separate panel discussion on other regulations that are impacting the defense industry in terms of cybersecurity and other things that are certainly impacting the entire defense industrial base.
That's great, Todd. I got a lot of questions around this just because it's difficult. If you made a good point about, do you have a multi-cloud strategy and what application do you use for what? A lot of some good but mostly bad decisions were made over the past year as to what model or technology do I use for a specific problem in government cloud. There have been some vendors that have popped up, as they always will, to fill a temporary void. There's one technology I came across with several clients this year, Ask Sage, and they definitely filled a gap in terms of pick your own model. This will work in a contained-based environment. We can deploy these services meeting DoD IL4, IL5, and above, and then all of a sudden, new tech comes out and replaces some of their technology and their capabilities. So do you go back and say, okay, well, I'm going to redo this and I don't need this technology anymore, or do I continue down this path? But overall, if you take a step back, I think everyone realizes that we have to have a multi-cloud strategy. We have to have a multi-AI model, strategy. What needs to be implemented is a run book or a playbook, just so that you can actually create an if-then scenario. So if we've got one scenario of like Anduril as an example, they just incorporated OpenAI into defense systems and their specific arsenal. And so, what was the decision that they made to use OpenAI in a contained model for that specific use case? I think it's definitely a playbook that has to be created and agreed upon, and it's going to continue to evolve. But it's very difficult right now to make those decisions. Joe, what are you kind of experiencing?
But I'll just,
go ahead, Tom.
just 1 second. I wanted to add one
go
point to that. But traditionally with applications, you look across ERPs or you look across PLM systems and so forth, the stickiness has always been the ability to be able to move yourself from one application to the next. It's not an easy job to say we're going to fundamentally re-architect our processes and then we're going to leave application A and go to application B. I think this space, given RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and the fact that you don't necessarily have to put a lot of data structure hardening around architectures, it makes it less sticky and the ability to move. And I think that also creates a unique challenge where people are just going to go to the LLM flavor of the month, and that could create a continuing disruption as well.
Yeah, Todd.
Thanks for adding that.
We agree with that. Like we've tried to build our system so that we're agnostic, and from an LLM standpoint, we can switch engines really quickly, but those additional services that we're using for retrieval augmented generation, for the chunking, for search, they're heavily built in. I've had several companies come to us and want us to switch cloud providers there, and it just doesn't make sense from a financial perspective. So yeah, that definitely resonates with me.
I think we got a question from the crowd. Let's change it up a little bit. Andrew Blackman, CIO from United Launch Alliance. Do you want to give a question?
Hey, Joe, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, hey, perfect. Hey, thanks for the panelists. This is really intriguing. I have two questions. ULA, as you may have heard, is got a broad partnership with Amazon for launching their next generation of Kuiper satellites, and so therefore we see, Amazon is not just a vendor for us to consume AWS from, but also as a customer, and so that's a delicate relationship, and it's kind of being pushed in that direction to some degree for rolling out cloud services. But like many of the panelists have mentioned, I've come to see some of the advanced capabilities that kind of are differentiating Microsoft from the pack, and they seem to have some competitive advantage at this juncture. So I have a two-part question. That is that it seems that data is really getting to be king, and so that you can use some of these advanced LLM capabilities, and you have to expose your data to the cloud. And it feels to me like the ERP systems or PLM systems and other things that have large amounts of data need to follow along where you want to use some of these advanced data tools and glean the power. So kind of would be interested in hearing from the panelists about what their data strategy is to expose their data from their large ERP, PLM, et cetera, systems to these large language models and getting value out. That's part number one. And then part number two is I'm wondering if anybody is doing anything with exposing unstructured data on like legacy file shares like NetApps or EMC Isilons or whatever to the cloud, and what kind of strategies they have for getting value out of their unstructured data. Thanks.
Anyone want to take a stab at responding? I don't think Andrew wants to hear from me. Let's get the panelists to respond. Dana, Todd?
I'm sorry,
think
I was
somebody was
actually speaking on mute. So can you hear me okay, Joe?
Yeah, there you go.
Especially with respect to Andrew, your question, like how we are exposing the information to some of these LLMs. The approach, which again, whether it's by design, don't know. But I think as a data democratization initiative, which we had around a few years back, we started consolidating some of our major components of the data in our central data lake. So even before the generative AI revolution started, we already started having some of our data getting consolidated into in a single ecosystem. Now that in some shape and form kind of like helped us to launch some of the generative AI initiatives on top of them. And one of the questions we actually ask when before we launch any AI initiative is how good the data is with respect to that problem definition. Now, you don't have to be perfect, but is it at least in a shape where we can start consuming it? That's one of the assessment which we do before we launch our ship towards that. So that's how we are approaching it. But as we discover, there are some elements of the data may not be available in the lake, but that's a discovery, and we put in a structure in place to consolidate those. Is an ongoing process, but a good portion of our data is already available in data lake.
Great answer.
Andrew, on the back end of your question about unstructured data, I promise this isn't a commercial for Microsoft, but we did gain a tremendous amount of benefit from their optical character recognition capability. Pulling in all these, our industry just loves paper, these maintenance records, and being able to quickly apply metadata and frankly search and scan off of things that just would have taken us a whole lot longer before. And so we've, as I mentioned on the 737 example, gleaned a lot of wisdom out of these paper maintenance records as a good start. And like anything, you gotta be careful because that meter starts running pretty fast when you put it in Azure. But we found a way to put it on low-cost storage, get a lot of value for our customers, and glean a lot of new insights.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add that we did the same with a public-facing YouTube channel with all of our how-to tips and tricks to our owners, operators, and service technicians of several volumes of YouTube videos that we're able to index, put into the vector search, and be able to reference those videos and the transcripts in the LLM.
Yeah, the unstructured data is a really tough one and an interesting one. I can talk a little bit about a application that we're working on developing and deploying right now. I just can't tell you how it works. But we're building something called Magic Milestone. So we spend a ton of time preparing for PDR, CDR, TRR. I mean, just an insane amount of time, teams of 300, 400, all coming together to build this giant PowerPoint deck. And so what we're working on right now is something called Milestone Magic, which will automate all of that. We want to just basically, my vision for this is, at the end of the day, Mark goes, okay, I want to see where we're at and how ready we are for PDR. He goes in, he clicks a single button, and then overnight, a massive conglomerate of algorithms starts running in the background to build out that deck for him. No longer do you need the engineers to go build a PowerPoint deck, which I do still think is valuable because it helps you kind of consolidate your thoughts and summarize what you want to say. But this would really give you a first hack at, hey, here's the content I think you need to present on. The piece of that is difficult is the amount of data, both structured and unstructured, mostly unstructured. I mean, just imagine that entire corpus of program data. We ran some back of the envelope metrics at some point, and I want to say we were developing 20 gig a day in a single program, and that was imagery, it was textual data, it was video simulations, all that kind of stuff. And then overall on the entire program data, we were talking about petabytes of data. The one that we had looked at specifically had a ton of video content and multimodal type stuff that we were looking at. But I'm specifically worried about that right now. And just like you said, there's immense value in that data. Being able to extract that value is tricky. LLMs do a pretty incredible job right now, but getting the full value out of that's tricky.
That's really great feedback, guys. Andrew, thank you for the question. I was actually talking to one of the, I won't specify the specific details here, but when it comes to leveraging existing unstructured data and dealing with the petabytes of data that might exist in those data stores, I had one vendor come in and say, hey, we'll take a RAG pipeline and put it on top of it and make a copy of the data and then start caching, and we'll be great. Well, my answer back or question back to them was, do you have the money for the copy of that data? Where's it going to sit? Who's paying for my storage? And they didn't have an answer to that. Thankfully, we worked internally to try to solve for that problem. We've got some folks that are on our ERP team. Jose Rocha, who actually has been chatting in the chat window, has solved for a lot of ERP specific data problems. But on this specific issue, our solution and our recommended approach was there's already SQL queries that are in place or specific stored procedures that are automating some of those services. Can we put a Gen AI front end on those SQL queries to take advantage of the existing environment without creating a cache or additional storage components that would raise up that cost, overall, just for now? I don't think it's a great long-term play because you have a lot of latency still involved in those SQL queries. But if you could cache the data, it does solve for that. But there's a lot of different ways we can architect this. Andrew, that was a fantastic question. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay, so just still on the topic of or does anyone else want to respond or add to that conversation before we?
The only one thing which I will say, Joe, to what both you as well as Joe mentioned, I think, again, this is the same thing which I said at the start of the conversation. Especially the advancements in the generative AI are unlocking significant opportunities, especially in the area of unstructured content. But one thing which we all need to be going into that with the eyes wide open is some of this unstructured content could be sensitive, and you have some guardrails with respect to who has access to that information. Now, let's assume you use that to create an LLM and you created a RAG-based application on top of it. Now, suddenly, your AI application has that inherent knowledge. So how do we really make sure that there's a consistency of the access management to both the systems is synced up is a challenge which we all need to be cognizant about. So just a point.
Well, as we grow this community, Dina, I think one thing we could do is kind of come together on a few approaches and share that just within this community maybe help others in these general problems that we all share. So let's take that as a note, moving forward, and we'll figure out a appropriate forum for that. Kind of getting back, and I had a question for you, Dina. You're dealing with the gov cloud versus commercial cloud, this vendor for that, AI versus Gen AI. We spent a lot of time talking about Gen AI. Do you have any specific standards or playbook for making decisions on, I'm only going to use, AWS for software engineering in GovCloud, or I'm only going to use Azure OpenAI for commercial cloud chat GPT bots, right? Or chat bots. I'm not, don't have to answer those specifically, but when you're thinking about a multi-cloud strategy and where to place one vendor or the other vendor, what goes through your mind dealing with the 50 to 100,000 users you have to support?
Yeah, I think without getting into specific details, Joe, I think
Right.
significant portion of our business process related data resides on one hyperscaler. And but as you know, we are actually multi-cloud operator within GE Aerospace. So
Right.
we actually use, if the data is on hyperscaler A, our AI system will reside on that solution. Whereas if I am trying to do something which is like a more broadband employee productivity across 50,000, 60,000 employees, we use a different option. So those are some of our guiding principles. And especially with respect to conventional AI, I think we pretty much figured out the way how we actually can operate both in commercial as well as Gov Cloud, because some of them are actually somewhat matured, especially when it comes to generative AI. Availability of these systems on Gov Cloud, commercial cloud is leading. So we are actually, all our experiments at this point of time in some shape and form are more towards the commercial set, because we are both commercial airline as well as we are also support the defense. So we are learning on the commercial side, and actually we are fast following that on the defense side. So that's the approach which we are taking.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I didn't invite any vendors to this call for that specific reason, but I understand you can't get, and I'm not asking you to get into specifics. I think it's an interesting question. We're going to continue to evolve the answer to those questions. I think one other question I had was, when you're deploying these types of technologies into GovCloud, do you have a lot of pushback and significant stifling by your cyber team, who has to go through an individual granular level of review of the model, its access to the data, the access from an end user perspective, and any output and responsible AI that gets added to that overall process, and to the point where you're just like, this is taking too long. I'm not even sure I can enable this use case. Does that has that experience happened to you guys? And is it frequent, and is it really frustrating? And do you have maybe a solution to that? I guess I'll kick it back over to Todd or anyone else that wants to answer that question. I know this one's off the cuff.
Yeah, I don't know if we've gotten, all of our initiatives have been, fail fast initiatives, leverage fast initiatives. I think, well, quite frankly, I think there was one that I think we kind of missed the mark on, and it was around an engagement survey across our organization. And I think at the end of the day, it may have been just we probably didn't define what the expected outcomes that we wanted to be able to leverage as part of the use case, and we ended up probably missing a window of opportunity to do something to fail fast. But I don't think we've gotten into any where we're just spinning our wheels as of yet. I'm sure we're gonna encounter some.
Yeah, and I meant more like blockers from a regulatory or compliance perspective, because there are use cases that we deploy into GovCloud, and then cyber comes in and says, well, this specific component has an issue with QE. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I guess we took the stance up front. When I talked to several peers in industry and across multiple industries around this space, it seemed like at least for the first 12 months as I started looking into this topic, a lot of my peers were just talking about, let's start with defining policy and defining what ethical AI use is, generative AI use is, and so forth. And we took the position that generative AI is no different than any other tool that we have in our arsenal. And we already have acceptable use policy in IT. We already have, things that define that. Let's continue to move forward under the auspice of we have policy in place around acceptable use of computing technology, and that includes being responsible with computing technology, without having to go out and create and spend a lot of time defining new policy. Let's look at the fringe things and address those as they appear. And I think we're starting to see some of those fringe things as we look at things like O365 Copilot. A lot of the discussion internally, and maybe less on the compliance side, but more on just internal risk around data discovery, retention, recording, even having meetings with third parties that have the ability to take transcripts and notes and record and acknowledge that you're attending a meeting being recorded, like this meeting, and what's acceptable and what's not. So, looking at those fringe items and making decisions around retention, around discoverability, around and there, I think we're addressing, again, the acceptable use, but there are probably some other fringe items around liabilities and other things. But I think we feel that there's some identification with using proprietary LLMs that offer some of that protection.
Yeah.
Point.
Our models are generally, we use all GovCloud. And so I don't have a ton of insight here because we decided early on, because all of our data is export controlled and INAR and CUI, that we never wanted it to have the potential of running on international servers, right? Because in essence, we would have broken the law there. I will say one item that we did discuss heavily is if you're paying for a commercial cloud, they're not doing any training on your data and they're not doing any storage. And so the thought process was, okay, if the data on your computer is secure and you go ask, let's say, a ChatGPT on a commercial cloud, for example, that data is encrypted on the way up, it is processed on the server side, and then it is encrypted on the way down, and they don't have any insight necessarily into the processor side. They're not storing anything, so it's not like they have a bunch of your data being held there. And so can you use it for just processing was the idea. We also went through an exercise of, well, hey, if we enable this, commercially available, cloud, how much data are they actually going to get in general? So like we looked at flight software and evaluated how many lines of code it was sending at any point in time and how many different chats there would have to be among how many different files, and tried to put together a probabilistic model that said, okay, how long would it take them to either A, get all of our source code, or B, for them to be able to get a large enough portion of our source code that it hurts, right? Or perhaps we cross some threshold. In the end, like I said, we were never able to quite get comfortable with it and say, okay, well, we're okay with that risk posture. And so we do all GovCloud type stuff. But I don't know, maybe that provides another organization an avenue to look at.
That's good feedback. Well, thanks, guys, for answering the question. Another issue, just to round out this topic of dealing with regulatory compliance and some of the specific data protection, the talent pool for generative AI beyond prompting, the real use of it and being able to set up RAG pipelines and really drive the value of it is limited in the US. And when you're working on a US person's only specific set of data, corpus of information that's available, you can't use non-US persons. So have any of you guys been in a situation where you've been able to leverage, non-US person engineering without having them have specific access to US person only or export controlled data? Has anyone ever come that specific scenario? Because obviously there's tons of talent internationally. And if you could couple that and harness it and separate it, and this is an age-old IT data issue, not just Gen AI, but specific to Gen AI. I'm wondering if any of you guys have overcome any of that to some degree.
Yeah, so we do. We have a technology center in India that we have resources for both our commercial business and our defense businesses in IT. I have software developers there, PLM and ERP developers. You know, it's about working in environments that don't have export controlled data in those environments, or working on the right licenses for them to be able to support the data in isolated situations. And we have engineers there as well. So beyond IT, we have engineers that work across our businesses that have, you know, both in commercial and in our largely commercial. We have very few that are doing anything for our defense contracts, if any.
Okay, great. Thanks, Todd. Well, I know that compliance and regulations are, it's the most exciting subject matter to talk about, but we had to talk about it because it is an issue and it causes a lot of scenarios to go awry or, succeed. Andrew, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, before we leave compliance, I'll go on a mini rant for a second. In the space that we live in, it drives me absolutely nuts the amount of waste we see in U.S. airspace. This is more of a commercial problem than a military problem. But next time you're flying, just notice how inefficient your approach is, your landing is. And what's that mean? It means as consumers, we pay more for flights because fuel's wasted. It means we're creating a lot of carbon we don't need to create in the environment. It means we can't get a lot of slots to airports that badly need slots. And so having seen more thoughtful parts of the world in this space really take this on and now use AI in a meaningful way. And I'm seeing this in real time at Kuala Lumpur, seeing this in real time in Singapore. I'm hoping we made a lot of effort with the previous administration. I'm hoping this new administration is maybe more open to looking at the problem holistically. Today, it's tackled one airport at a time. And Houston gets to solve the problem different than Dallas, gets to solve it different than Austin, gets to solve it different in San Antonio. And we all see that. So before we leave this compliance area, I'm just really hopeful that maybe we can look at airspace in a new way and look more systematically, not airport to airport to airport to airport.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the other hats that I wear, Andrew, is I'm the co-leader of our U.S. space program. And one of the biggest issues we discussed today is waste in space. It's a big problem. And so we have a lot of discussions on sustainability and, laser communication between satellites, something Joe and I know a little bit about there from a Space Force perspective. But yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing problem. It's compounded, constantly. But I'm glad you brought that up and feel free to rant. Tell us how you really feel.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to, unless anyone else has a comment to make on this specific subject, we're just going to turn the, like in traditional order here, a poll over to the audience and kind of get some feedback from them. So Christy and Tracy, if you guys don't mind throwing that over, and then we'll get to the fun stuff and wrap it up. All right. So how do you feel about compliance and regulations in AI in the A&D sector? A few seconds here. By the way, I want to congratulate you guys. It's been an hour and a half and we've only lost 7 or 8 people. So fantastic. That's pretty much on par with what I was thinking. All right, so let's pivot a little here and talk about something a little more fun. Emerging tech and R&D. Some of the things that we see on the horizon. Obviously, today was a huge announcement with respect to OpenAI and ChatGPT Gov. That's some really cool stuff that's opening up some new doors. And I know that they're working on a O3 reasoning model right now that's set to be released, and then also an O4 that's already in development. And just a rapid release of that capability that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to innovate. In addition, you've seen DeepSeek in their huge announcement and rapid download. I think it's the #1 download on all app stores, if I'm not mistaken, and people are freaking out about it. Does it replace ChatGPT? Is it the future of AI? We do have a point of view on that at the firm. For me personally, And speaking on behalf of the firm, I would say that it's good for the market in terms of being able to create more competitiveness, more challenge, and more influence from an innovation perspective. I think there's some stark differences in how you use that technology versus a enterprise capability for an organization, and especially for a government institution. So there's a major gap there, and I do implore you guys to seek those gaps and always explore. But I'm going to turn it over to the crowd here, or turn it over to the panel here, and ask you guys, what do you see as the most innovative or cool, catchy thing that you got your eye on or have some opinions about in terms of the future of AI moving forward? I guess handing it back over to Todd, or normal fashion.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of spaces that are certainly on my radar right now. I think the automation through agents on agents. So this multi-layer of not just having a single thread of an automation through point to point, but having an ecosystem of automated agents that are working in concert with each other. I think the ability for us to be able to figure out how to drive efficiency through non-value added tasks and automation. I think that when I think that being able to, I just look even within my own function across IT, and I just think about the complexities of a broader supply chain where cloud technologies are driving us, not only for the old on-prem, where we have our ecosystems in our data center, and now we've got third-party applications, SaaS, everything sprawled out everywhere, and trying to understand the resiliency and the health of that ecosystem, and to be able to have more access to insight and responsiveness and detectability and understanding kind of the cause and effect. So we have better responsiveness and a better operations overall, and make right decisions. And then I think the other piece that I'm excited about as a global company, continuing to drive the ability for the near real-time language translation and audio translation. I think that's, even through Teams discussion, I think that's certainly something I think is going to continue to bring global companies together, one like ours. And I've got teammates that can we certainly have difficulty translating and having conversations, but I think these are going to be opportunities for us to work and collaborate closer together.
Really glad you brought that one up, Todd. One thing that you don't know about me is I worked at Microsoft Research, and my team built Teams. And Zudong Wang, who's my supervisor or director at Microsoft Research, we had developed instant translation early on for Link, and then Communicator, and then Skype for Business. If you guys remember that dates me. It used to be called Live Communication Server. In fact, I wrote a few books about that myself, but translation was a big deal, and it's never really gotten to the point where I can talk and listen and hear, like a Babelfish type scenario. And I think we're getting close, to that.
Yep.
Todd, do you ever think we're going to be in a scenario where multi-agent architecture, from a software engineering perspective, will enable an actual, AI pod? I know we have software engineers that are using technology as an AI assisted pod, but do you think you'll ever have that trust to say, hey, look, here's a user story, or here's a series of user stories, go sprint against this and hand it off to the AI pod? Or do you think there will always be human intervention?
I heard the earlier example of that and how that was being built into the software development lifecycle, and this is an area where you and I've even had this conversation about how does it help shorten the software development lifecycle period, whether it's custom software development or even a COTS implementation where you're doing systems integration and having to go through that evolution of where you buy an off-the-shelf system and it's a toolkit, and you have to make the decisions on how do you configure your process. But then there have been decisions made before by others that have gone there, and how can you accelerate based on the type of business process you're trying to enable, the decisions around configuration, the decisions around unit level testing, the decisions around broader integration testing and so forth. I agree with the panelists that said you don't want to remove the person in the loop through particularly like the testing. You don't want people to become complacent and say they did that, they took care of it. Maybe that's kind of the whole CrowdStrike complacency in software testing. But I do think there's value in putting supervised process and making sure that you have the right understanding of what supervised means through that process, and just for the overall benefit of the outcome that we're going to get from it.
Awesome. Joe, I know you got some specific feedback on that specific scenario, but what's your take on, or what do you think is going to be the next coolest thing in AI for A&D moving forward?
So I think Todd hit it with the agentic AI. That's where I see us moving in general. In a previous life, I ran a portfolio of AI programs that we were delivering for a DoD customer. So things like network strike weapon systems, or self-driving F-16s, or self-driving autonomous ground vehicles for shoot and scoop type missions. And we had a ton of discussions with the customer on human in the loop versus human on the loop. So human in the loop is, exactly what Todd was mentioning, where you always have a human reviewing every line of code and approving that, yes, this meets my requirements and we're good to push it. Human on the loop is more of an advisory role, where it looks at the output and says, okay, am I okay with this? I think for me, it comes down to trust. And I will say that I'm the first one that doesn't trust the system right now. I am always reviewing the prompts, just like the story earlier that I shared. But I think eventually we'll get to a place where we can be a little bit more on the loop instead. But it's about developing trust with it. Think about an intern, or maybe let's use a child as an example, right? When you have a new baby, and Joe, hopefully congratulations are in order here shortly. But, when you start out and you have a toddler, you're always holding their hands when you're, crossing a street, or even just walking on a sidewalk, right? Because they don't have the experience or knowledge not to jump out into traffic if they see a ball or whatever, right? And so you don't have trust in them at that point. And so you're always holding their hand, making sure that you have control of the system. You're in the loop in that point. But eventually, they grow up, and you develop trust in them that, hey, they have responded the correct way in 1,000 or 1,000,000 situations, that I'm now comfortable. I don't have to hold their hand anymore, and I can give them a little bit more freedom, and I can monitor them a little bit more, and just say, okay, I'm keeping a close eye on them. And eventually, they grow up and they become teenagers, or, in college, and maybe you even start paying a little less attention. You're not constantly with them. And I think that transitions really well to AI. In the beginning, we don't have any trust in these systems, especially when we're training them, when they're brand new. There's very little trust there. I think back to like when we had GPT-2, or, the early days of GPT-3 and stuff like that, and how atrocious the responses were at that point in time. And I think with where we are now with 3.5 and 4 and 4.0 and 0.1, or even DeepSeek's R1 model, we're gaining a little bit more trust and starting to say, okay, maybe we just keep the training wheels on, but we're still monitoring it and making sure that it's accurate in its output. And then, finally, at the very end, I think eventually we'll get comfortable enough with these systems making decisions, but it's going to take a ton of interfacing with the system. It's going to take a ton of testing. And I think that testing is really the area that I'm most focused on for the next generation is, can I test all of the different scenarios this is going to run into, so that I get better trust in the system day one, and I get better efficiency out of it maybe. And Joe, if there's time at the end, I'd love to talk more about DeepSeek and you guys' thoughts. And I was chatting with the company Osni AI last night, and I have some interesting thoughts there as well. So maybe at the end we can go into DeepSeek a little more.
And before we go there too, I mean, are there any other specific kind of personal or ambitions on where you think AI is going and what would be the coolest, kind of innovation in AI? Doesn't have to be related to your job, just could be, anything, real life.
Related to my job. So I mentioned earlier that I had those 3 pillars last year, commercial solutions, custom solutions, and then mission specific solutions. I've collapsed those this year to two specific areas. Really, you combine the first 2 pillars and you still have the mission solutions. What I'm really focused on right now is bringing AI in a way that it's more embedded in your day job. So like right now, you have to go out to InfoHub, which is our chat system, right? You have to upload files. It's a manual process. Despite it being super convenient, you're still, like you mentioned, Joe, you've got a system out on the side that you're going into. This year, I'm really focused on bringing those capabilities into the applications that we're using on a day-to-day basis and making it so AI is just there with you constantly. So instead of you going out and summarizing some of the conversation and asking what follow-up questions can I have here, I want that assistant built into Zoom so that it's constantly monitoring our discussion and making recommendations. It knows who you are, Joe, and says, hey, Joe is moderating this discussion and he's interested in questions and summarizing some of what the speakers are saying. I don't want you to go out. I want it to be there. I don't want you to have to think about it. It should be more like it is with VS Code and some of the co-pilots right now, where it's an autocomplete. It's constantly looking ahead for you and making recommendations versus retroactive and you giving it information and asking for help.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. Andrew, what are your thoughts? You think we're going to see a Tesla bot out on the tarmac, taking notes from the field? Or not yet?
We might. I'll throw you a professional one and a personal one since you opened up the aperture. I love it. On the professional front, spent a couple years in stealth working with Qantas Airlines pilots, providing them, frankly, their data before and after every mission on how they did around safety. Qantas, if you don't know, takes a ton of pride in being the safest airline on earth, and they invest a lot in this space, and they're always trying to lead from the front. This was dangerous because, frankly, the pilots and the pilots union don't like the notion of being spied on or somebody looking over their shoulder watching. But for 2 years, we did watch in high fidelity how they flew. And much like my watch is going to tell me today how many steps I took, how many calories I burned, we showed them, again, only them, how they did. Then about 2 years in, started de-identifying how other pilots did on the same mission. And one of the big quick ahas was almost every pilot, I'd say every pilot on this earth is type A. And no one needs to tell them to do a better job. You just show them their data, show them how their peers are doing, and next thing you know, things are changing in real time, just taking advantage of that personality. You take that out, we now have an app, and I promise it's not a plug, but called Flight Pulse, used by 50,000 commercial pilots around the world on the same thinking. And now what we want to do is take it to training. When you look at training of a pilot, I'll start at the front end, 75% of people that say, I want to be a pilot, drop out. There's got to be a more efficient way before people spend a lot of money and time to learn that. But then once you do become a pilot, so much of the training still today, and I'll point to the commercial world, is let me just throw random things at you that you may be excellent at, or frankly, you're never going to see in your lifetime, but that's just as an instructor, my job is to throw random, bizarre things at you to see how you respond. And yet, like the watch, like our labs, when we go to the doctor, we could show pilots a lot more prescriptively. When you land on this runway in these wind conditions, kind of unstable. Let's do 3 or 4 practice runs today. So when you go back to Newark tomorrow, you're going to be okay. We're on the forefront of doing that right now. I'm pretty excited about some of the learnings and some of the things we're going to be able to take to the cockpit. On the personal side, bear with me, this may sound a little bit weird, but I have a son with autism and another son with ADHD. And my wife and I have been on this journey trying to learn as much as we can in our spare time, which isn't that much. And yet I think there's got to be a way to have an Alexa kind of device, frankly, in our home, helping us be better parents, or maybe at school, helping our teachers teach, tapping into all the knowledge and all the research that exists around these 2 mental conditions that just frankly, we don't have. And so I'm hopeful this is something in my personal time I'm starting to investigate and research a lot more. That technology makes its way, frankly, into parents' hands and teachers' hands really, really quick, and just raises the outcomes for these kids.
Andrew, I love that you brought that up. You and I've had some conversations about that, because personally I struggle with those things. I'm actually extremely high functioning autistic, and I also have ADHD. And when I was growing up, there was no training. My parents didn't know what to do. They gave me Ritalin, with a caramel and said, have a good day. And I tried to calm it down. But I've had to train myself over the years, and it's been a very difficult process. Eye contact, rocking. I don't know if you notice, but sometimes I rock back and forth quite a bit,
Sure.
and I change eye contact. Those are little telltale signs. But having generative AI capabilities specifically around solving problems for non job related scenarios, personal scenarios, and advice, and the latest research and in these types of mental disorders and challenges, is really been a benefit to me personally, and my nephew who is somewhat functioning autistic. There's been a lot of gains there for him personally. He loves ChatGPT, by the way.
Right.
Maybe at an unhealthy level. I mean, it's become a best friend of his, and he doesn't use the text version. He's just straight up talking, nonstop. But to watch him think and to watch some of the output of those conversations is amazing to me. I mean, really amazing.
But imagine if you could have a
Um,
pilot going with you every day, taking all that wisdom versus, frankly,
yeah,
a
I
lot of the
agree.
bad wisdom, and our parents were well intended that they passed on to us. I think it could be huge.
I agree. I agree completely. Thank you very much. That was great. Denna, would love to hear your thoughts. Future tech, AI on steroids, Tesla bots sitting in your pods.
A couple of thoughts on that, Joe. I think I break this into like two pieces. One, what I see is like more like a short term. The second is like more like a little bit of a out in the time. So especially on the short term side, I think both the Todd and Joe, to some extent, alluded towards that. I see that like this agentic framework is going to explode, because I think the day is not too far where this agentic framework or some of the generative AI agents will have something like a swarm intelligence. Like they actually can kind of like interact with among themselves, and especially with these reasoning models which are coming now, I think that brings a totally different level of transparency. So I'm actually very bullish on how this entire concept of network of agentic framework will work. I think that's going to unlock significant, in my opinion, outcomes/value. The second piece, I don't know who is going to have that magic bullet, but the underlying problem is still the data. Now, how do we, especially in a big enterprise, the data is there, the value is there. It's a question of how do we really discover that, connect it, and drive the outcome. I think there are some evolving technologies which actually can kind of like stitch this disparate data systems and bring that required connected tissue across these different data systems. I think that's going to become, in my opinion, a thing going forward for all of us, especially for scaling the AI initiative. So these are the two things on top of my mind. And from a, I don't know whether it's a medium term or long term, like how quantum compute is going to change the way how we are thinking about AI. Time will tell. It's a complex problem. It's altogether a different altitude. That I'm very curious about it. And the second aspect of it is like everybody talks about artificial general intelligence. Just in a personal capacity as a person who is interested in AI, I actually keeping a very close watch on the developments, especially on the AGI side of it, like where it is, how it is going to be. Now time will tell, like how it is going to evolve. So those are the two aspects of my thinking, Joe.
That was spot on, Dana. Thank you so much for actually mentioning quantum. I was surprised no one said quantum. And actually, I think we have somebody in the chat group here, Dr. Travis Taylor, that said something about AI and quantum field theory. I feel that quantum is going to be a huge player in AGI and other problem-solving scenarios in the future. Pairing those two things up as quantum technology becomes a little more affordable to deploy and less resilient or less reliant on massive amounts of infrastructure, which I think Stargate and other investments are trying to solve right now. But we're going to see a pretty heavy data center play and energy play. If you notice that the executive orders had to do with a lot about energy and a lot about support for non-regulation of AI, and then the creation of Stargate. Those three things alone are very telltale signs of what's happening in the future. I don't know if we can unmute anybody in the audience, or no, we did with Andrew. I don't. Travis, are you on by chance?
Can you hear me?
Change this up. Yes,
Can you hear
sir.
me? All right.
I can hear you. What are your thoughts on quantum and generative AI and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So first off, it's one of the most unbelievable tools I've ever used in developing modern physical theories. For example, in general relativity, I've done a lot of papers on warp theory of late, and there are calculations that are immense numbers of variables in each equations, and each equation is a tensor of multiple, it's a matrix of so many variables, and so we've only ever done it numerically before because it just takes too long to do it by hand. I recently published a paper almost a year ago now that I used Chat GPT to help me calculate by hand it's about a 50-page general relativity calculation. Now occasionally it drops an indice or a number here and there, and you have to go through and check its work. But if I would have done it myself, it would have taken me years. And that has changed productivity in a way that I would have never imagined it 5-10 years ago. And in the same aspect, quantum field theory is the same way. The calculations are so intense and complex, and the problem is the general LLM models, while they have a bunch of stuff from the internet knowledge they can get, we need to train a specific, general relativity AI or quantum field theory AI that is an actual product or widget that you can train on your particular application or needs. And I know that's doable. It's just going to take some work. Now, the big question I have is, because I play around with IBM's quantum computer and use the Qiskit interface, which is Python based, and I use the AIs currently to help generate the quantum circuit setup, but I've been recently trying to figure out how to use the quantum circuits to actually become an AI algorithm. And I've read papers, I don't think anybody's reached that yet. But if you combine the quantum processing, which we think is why we have consciousness, is because of the quantum processors in the protein microtubulin in our brains. If you combine, quantum processors with an AI algorithm, then you might actually be something that's even far more conscious than the large language models.
Yep, I agree. Travis, that was intriguing. Thank you very much. Todd, I know you have to go. I was going to come to you really quickly and ask for you to provide a final thought, if you don't mind, before you part, and then we'll open it up here.
No, my final thought would be, first of all, I appreciate you giving me the time and the space to be part of this panel. Great conversations across the board, and even enjoyed that additional insertion on quantum computing. That's certainly fascinating. My thought and takeaway here is, as technology leaders, sometimes we have to make space for innovation. It's, we're not always handed the budgets or the opportunities to go do things, and this is a space where, certainly putting the right priority and the right people to solve problems creatively and quickly certainly can drive great outcomes. So I look forward to catching the back end of this, the pieces I miss, and apologize for having to drop.
Oh, no worries. We appreciate your time, Todd. Great to have you, and we'll be in touch for sure. All right, team. So we're not done just yet here. I want to open it up more to, I guess, the audience. If they want to communicate a question or a comment or anything that the panel here wants to respond to, feel free to use the chat, and we will be on the watch out. In the meantime, I thought that was pretty intriguing, Travis. Thank you for that comment. That was pretty detailed. Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of research here. There's going to be a lot more innovation, and no one's really solved for that alone. I don't like the fact that they're two separate things. I would love to see the convergence of quantum and AI, generative AI, kind of come together towards the future. Because if you think about the way that, it's not too crazy to think that there could be a physical, entity, a robot or whatever you want to call it, with natural language capabilities that is able to process knowledge in parallel, which quantum allows you to do, and not just vectorized data, video, imaging, audio, etc., in real time. And that's scary and awesome, at the same time. One thing we didn't talk about today was, technologies like Sora or, Adobe Firefly or some of those technologies. We're not vectorizing data, but you can see, computer vision has come a long way now with the capabilities around generative AI. I remember back with my work that I was doing with a few intel agencies, and I can't go into much more detail about that on this call, but I had built an end-to-end computer vision solution. So I was taking batches amounts of recon data that was image-based or video-based. The video was terrible. You talk about unstructured data. That's very unstructured data and very hard to rely on. And we had to create, labels to identify certain objects. Some of those labels were not in the, computer vision dictionary. So there's a lot of manual time spent there. Now, I'm seeing a video of, a vision service that's tied to a Gen AI capability that's actually recognizing objects and providing an output. Insane. So I think there's a lot more to come in that space. I know we're all focused on, data prep and unstructured, structured data, getting it into a RAG pipeline, enabling efficiencies in our work streams and in the software engineering pods. But I think there's a lot more to come. Anyone else have some comments or things that they want to say from the audience or the panel? Oh, looks like we do have some here. Hold on. I know we talked about governance, in the world of AI, but have we discussed how the panel is preparing their organizations for bad actors? Deploying AI as a cyber attack tool. I'm going to open that up. Anyone on the panel want to talk about that?
Maybe Joe, I'll just make a quick comment. I think it is a fastly evolving space as other bad actors are trying to learn how this new technology could be used in a bad way. I think the way how we are thinking is how this new technology could be used by our cyber teams in a more proactive way. So I think that's how we are thinking about it. I cannot share more than that, but I think we are actually looking at some of these AI tools to become more proactive than reactive.
Yeah, I share that. There's a lot of things that I'm really worried about. Deep fakes with, the president or our CEO or, anybody in a position of power and being able to mimic their voice and their mannerisms and the video. And I think the only way to combat some of the AI attack vectors is with AI. And so to get more on point to the cyber tools, we're using artificial intelligence to monitor some of our data logs in the background. And it's a ton of data and we have filtering rules, but now we actually have an AI agent that it's looking and saying, okay, what do I think about this? Do all of these different connections that are being made mean there's an attack going on? Trying to, use more heuristics, if you will, because AI is essentially just a probability machine. So what's the probability I think that this connection is an attack versus, some other innocuous one? I think there's a lot more research to come there. I don't think we've even barely scratched the surface of attacks with AI or defense with AI.
Good point. Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves. With bad data, you get bad AI output, and I think we still run the risk of data poisoning scenarios that cause really bad, generative AI outputs for that matter. So it's still an ongoing scenario. Anomaly detection, is another one. Being able to really fully train and identify anomalies in the process and in the loop. Any other comments from the panel? Any other questions from the audience? No?
I have a comment
Everyone-
about that, Joe.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and that comment about the deep fakes and such. Well, we have tools that we use to see if we've got doctored videos or doctored imagery and other data, of course. But that's going to become like the new WPA encryption for everything. I mean, we're going to have that as the first line of defense in the firewall. Is every single thing, and that's going to be so calculation intensive, it's going to require an AI to look for an AI.
And Facebook,
Good point.
go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, Facebook actually attempted that, before Mark came out and said, hey, we're going to allow more freedom of speech on the Facebook platform. Before, they were doing a ton of work in the background trying to protect users from inflammatory content and from inappropriate content. And they still are to some degree, but they spent a ton of money. They had a massive team that was working on developing those protections. And I mean, if you've been on Facebook before, you know that it doesn't work all that well at this point in time. So I think there's a long way to go. Some of the best stuff I've seen right now take some of the classical methodology. So like if you look at, I remember a picture. Never mind. I don't think I can talk about that in this format. I remember a picture that was obviously faked. And when we started examining it in more detail, we realized, oh, this is the same item that has been duplicated and made smaller and put into the background. And, they had used the clone tool to basically mimic a bunch of that. And we started looking at like shadows and, points of highlights and stuff like that, and just trying to find inconsistencies or trying to find duplicates. That's what we do these days with some of the deep fake videos. Somebody will have an extra finger, but it's very nondescript, or the movement doesn't quite look natural. But I will say every day they're getting better and better to the point where I'm having trouble detecting which ones are fakes and not.
Great point. Yeah, and back to the quantum scenario too. I think you all know that there's an ongoing project right now that the U.S. government has taken and Department of Defense has taken to break our complex algorithms for encryption like RSA, ECC, etc. And as soon as that's done, there's going to be an ongoing constant need to re-encrypt and stay. It's going to be crazy, to be honest with you, to keep up with that and be able to implement the services that rely on that encryption too in real time. Well, guys, we covered a lot of ground. This isn't 3 hours, but I think it's plenty. My gut check on gut feel on this is we're good to go. I'm going to wrap it up here and turn it over to the panelists to provide a final thought here. And then I'll close it out. So let's start with Joe. Actually, let me go in reverse order. Dina, you go first.
That's fine, Joe. So again, my key takeaway for the everybody on the call is a fantastic conversation. I learned a ton from this. So thank you very much, Joe, for arranging this conversation. Again, for me, I think this is a fast evolving technology space. How do we make sure that our pace of learning matches with the pace of technology? How do we make sure that we stay current with the technology innovations is absolutely going to be critical. But don't lose sight of what are we trying to solve at the end of the day, a business outcome. So I think how my pace of learning is at the same pace with the pace of technology innovation tied to a business outcome. I think these three need to come together. I think that's the key. Don't underestimate the importance of culture shift in the organization. If you want to really scale AI, or AI has to become a new norm in your organization, there has to be focus on how we are actually going to address this from a cultural point of view. The last piece, it goes without saying, you cannot stand up a great building on a weak foundation. Your foundation is data and associated the infrastructure. So don't give a blind side for that. Otherwise, you're standing on a chicken legs.
I love it. I love it. Great, Dina. Thank you so much. I love the analogies, by the way. We got to keep those but we're going to call those Dina-isms moving forward as a community. All right. So we'll have do you remember, I think Saturday Night Live used to have a deep thoughts with Jack Handy. You guys remember that? Hopefully that doesn't date me too much. We'll have a deep thoughts or analysis analogy from Dina. Dina, thank you very much. Your responses were fantastic and very thoughtful. I really appreciate it. All right, Andrew, Mr. Coleman.
Just double click on what Dennis said. We're in the very fortunate spot of curating about 55,000 years of flight data and several billion maintenance records that we've worked extraordinarily hard to make pristine. And so the quality of the data has to be high, or pilots won't trust it, airlines won't trust it, MROs won't trust it. And yet we've maybe gleaned 0.1% of the wisdom that's going to come from that. And my favorite part of my career is when you find those moments where there's all this quote unquote just common knowledge, accepted knowledge, quote unquote wisdom, and you debunk it through data analytics and insights. And I think we're about to do that a whole lot. This space is a very, very exciting one. As Dinakar said, I've learned a lot from everyone on this call. So thank you, Joe, for taking the time to organize it. And I just look forward to building on the knowledge that's in this call and frankly, collectively around us. It's exciting time.
Pleasure, Andrew, and thank you very much for your time. You're senior executive, you're president of GE Aerospace Software. I don't want that to be lost. You could be spending your time anywhere else, and I really appreciate you coming to us and having your specific thoughts and points of view. Really appreciate that. Mr. Kopaz, round us out here.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended and to all my fellow panelists. I mean, just a really incredible discussion. This is obviously where I get my energy, and I found the different perspectives here just to be really incredible. So thanks for spending some time with me. I think as far as AI goes and what we're looking at in the future, and to kind of round it out, I think we've barely scratched the surface of AI. I think back to the deep history of AI, starting with the perceptrons back in like the 60s or 50s, and we just didn't have the processing power or the data to be able to go train those systems. And then, there's this deep winter of AI where we didn't really do deep learning, I'll say. We still did AI, but we didn't do that deep learning. And then, really starting in the late 2000s, maybe the 2020 timeframes, we've just seen a massive resurgence of AI. We've seen a velocity that we've never seen anywhere else before. If you look at like ChatGPT and the number of downloads it got in a single day, just absolutely astounding. It was faster deployment than people getting deployed on the internet, faster than any app before. And so I really feel that we've barely scratched the surface here. We need to continue to enable people with the tools and the protections in the back end to make sure that they can use these tools safely and effectively. We need more people to be comfortable with the tools. We need more people to be trained in the tools. And I think I'd just leave us with a quote. I don't know who it was. It was a professor at Cornell, but he said, AI is not going to take your job, which I completely agree with, but somebody using AI absolutely will.
That's great way to round it out there, Joe. And our firm agrees with that as well. So it's the point of view from PwC that AI is definitely not out there targeted to replace jobs. It's there to complement and to create new opportunities, which it will. But it will replace mundane tasks. And you're right. At the end of the day, those without access to AI, generative AI, you name it, are not going to have the same benefits and may be out of a job. So there's one way to look at that. I don't have a whole lot more to say. My goal was to bring you guys together, to bring a community together. This is going to be a first of several community webcasts and panels. Again, vendor free, sales free, analyst free, allow you guys to speak your mind. We're going to figure out what to do from a compliance perspective with the recording. I'm going to work with the panelists here with respect to maybe a white paper or an article based on what we discussed here. And I really thank you guys and treasure the time that you spent here, and especially the audience for hanging in there so long. Thank you guys so much. I know we didn't cover everything, but that'll be for the next round. And I'm gonna sign off here and go welcome my baby granddaughter to the world, who will grow up with nothing but AI. Just kidding, guys. Y'all have a great one, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.